Hi everyone, this is Nicole Spohr and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be creating 3 easy Distress Oxide backgrounds showcasing the newest Distress Oxide color called Crackling Campfire. It is an amazing orangish color, and I've obviously kind of gone the fall route, but I'm also going to create a card that's kind of an anytime type of card, just maybe with some fall colors. We're going to start with a reverse crackle background, and we're also going to ink up these gorgeous die cut leaves and sentiment. So everything here is got some sort of Distress Oxide ink in one way or another. I am going to take the large stitched maple and large stitched oak die cuts from Simon Says Stamp. These are beautiful, a nice large size, and we are going to ink them with Crackling Campfire, Aged Mahogany, and Fossilized Amber Distress Oxide inks. I've got 1 of the maple leaf and 2 of the oak leaves. We're going to do a little trio right through the center of our card, pop up a greeting through the center of these and have a little sentiment strip, plus we're going to have an amazing background. So I previously shared a card with some ink smooshing with Distress Oxide inks over the Crackle background, and I mentioned in that video I had previously earlier this month asked or put out there, you know, what did you guys want to see from the Simon Says Stamp Let's Connect release? And overwhelming, I got the Crackle backgrounds. So that one had the Crackle background with some ink smooshing, and I will link to that video at the end of this one if you want to have some other ideas. But this one is going to be the reverse crackle, which is awesome if you just want to straight stamp a solid color. I think you could ink blend on this too, but I wanted to go super easy here. So you're going to see a solid color, and then I'm going to ink around the edges just to kind of give it a nice little finished look there. Now I felt like my leaves were a little too bright and one-dimensional, so I'm going to take a little Gathered Twigs Distress Oxide ink and blend that into the edges of them. Definitely not perfect. I was going for imperfect with my ink blending. We're going to spritz these now with a little bit of water. Of course, we used Distress Oxide, so look at that oxidation. Look at the ink react with the water. It's going to leave us some beautiful results. I'm going to clean that up, and then I'm going to take a gold watercolor, and I'm just going to splatter my leaves with this beautiful gold, so then they're going to have a little bit of this metallic splatter to them as well. Then we're going to let these sit and completely air dry while we stamp our background. I'm taking a 4 by 5¼ inch panel of Nina 110-pound weight cardstock. So this is the heavier weight cardstock. I've already placed my reverse crackle background in my MISTI, and I'm inking it up with Gathered Twigs Distress Oxide ink. I really felt I wanted to keep the color theme consistent, I guess I want to say, but I wanted it to be something different than what I stamped the leaves in. So there is our background. Look at the great crackle effect. It's like a crackle paint effect, but with a stamp. I love these backgrounds. They can be used in so many ways. Now, as I was talking about a minute ago, I'm taking some ground espresso Distress Oxide ink, and we're just going to darken those edges up a little bit. And that's going to finish off the edges of our panel so that they're not quite so harsh. It kind of blurs out or blends out that crackling, which I really, really love. And it's going to help draw your eye in to the center of this card design. So here is our beautiful, beautiful background. We're going to go ahead and clean up our work surface again. This is a very messy project, it appears today. And then I've got my leaves. Look at these beauties. Now, another great thing about these are big. I could see doing some home decor type of projects with these because they are not teeny tiny. I'm going to take a piece of Fun Foam now and back both sides of it with Stick It adhesive and take our Big Thanks die and die cut that from this dimensional little sandwich. So it's white cardstock, Stick It adhesive, Fun Foam, and Stick It adhesive. This is my favorite tip for creating a dimensional scripty adhesive. I did finish this with smooth white cardstock, so now I can ink it up with whatever color I want. I find it's easier to do this while the sentiment is still in the cardstock sandwich before I've popped it out. We're inking it with Crackling Campfire and Aged Mahogany Distress Oxide inks. And then I am ready to put my leaves down on my background, and then we can pop our sentiment out. Now the great thing about this Big Thanks is there is a shadow for this, and I'm going to show you laying the sentiment directly over the leaves and then what a difference adding the shadow makes, how it really just pops off of those leaves instead of blending into them. So let's go ahead and pop this out. My recommendation is to move a little slow. It will die cut. It just is a little sticky because of that Fun Foam and the Stick It adhesive. So I like to just go really slow so that nothing tears, and pop all of those little inside pieces out as I am working. And the great thing about the Stick It adhesive on both sides, so one side attaches it obviously to the cardstock and the other side makes it a sticker. So there's no liquid glue necessary, which if you have followed me for a while, you know I like to avoid the liquid glue if possible. Now here I've just laid it down. I don't want to stick it down because I don't want it to stick, but look how it just fades into the design of the card. It's really not going to be showy at all. So I've die cut the shadow from white cardstock, and the great thing about this shadow is it is a nice thin shadow. When I place the thanks right on top of this, it is just instantly going to pop. I know more than get this laid down, and you can see that it is really going to be a focal point. Draw your eye in. It's going to draw your eye into the sentiment and then to those beautiful leaves that we've inked right behind it. This is a great card design for the fall. Anything in the fall. Anytime you would need a thank you card. It doesn't have to be a holiday or a special occasion. This will work for any type or any time you need a thank you card. So those were the dies, and then there's a stamp set that coordinates, and we're going to take a phrase from that. This is the Big Thanks Words stamp set, and we're going to stamp the phrase and gratitude for all you do. So our sentiment will read, thanks and gratitude for all you do, which I purposely picked the gratitude sentiment here because I really thought that worked beautifully with this fall themed card. But definitely you could do any of the sentiments and it would work. I stamped that with a clear embossing ink, and we're heat embossing with antique gold embossing powder. That's going to tie in beautifully to our gold splatters on those leaves. We're going to die cut then this little phrase using a nested banners die. This is one of my most often used die collections. It's a fantastic basic if you want perfect sentiment strips. I just shortened it a little bit by running it through twice. We're going to pop that up underneath the thanks with foam adhesive, and I did bring out my liquid adhesive for adhering down our large thanks. A little tip is I love to take something heavy and place it on top to help hold that flat while the liquid glue dries. In this case, we're just going to use some acrylic blocks because they are nice and heavy. They're also flat, and usually the bigger ones will cover anything that you want them to on a card. Here's that little foam adhesive back behind our sentiment strip we created. And then we're just going to place that right underneath. Finally, we're going to take these great little Trinity Stamps coffee bean clay hearts, and I'm going to center one underneath the sentiments, and then we're going to place another couple kind of at the end of the little loop there on thanks. And then, because this panel is slightly smaller than A2 sized, we're going to place it on a white side fold card base, and we're going to see a nice white border all the way around, which will tie in beautifully to the white border back behind thanks, and then of course the white back behind the crackle and our sentiment strip. Now I decided to finish the thanks with a little Wink of Stella clear glitter brush pen. I used to use this like pretty much for every card, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and I realized today I don't think I've used it in a year. And it just added a beautiful little bit of sparkle to this sentiment that is so pretty in real life. I don't think it shows up on video, but it is great. Next, we're going to create a basic embossed resist background with an embossed glazed sentiment. This is one of my all-time favorite things to do with Distress ink or Distress Oxide ink. And it is so easy, but so effective in creating your own background in whatever color matches your theme. So this is the Ghoulish Greetings My Favorite Things Stamps background. You guys, if you've been here for a while, you know I love a good text background. If you're brand new, I love a good text background. I have them in all kinds of occasions and themes, and they are my most often used backgrounds, I would say, just because I love it. A small text like this. And My Favorite Things, this is from their August release. It's absolutely phenomenal. I've stamped this again on a 4 by 5 1/4 inch panel of Nina Heavyweight 110 pound smooth white cardstock with clear embossing ink, and this time heat embossing with white embossing powder. Embossed resist simply means when you place your ink over the embossed area, the embossing will resist the ink. So as I start placing the Crackling Campfire ink over our embossing, you can see how those embossed areas are resisting. Yes, there's some ink sitting on top of the embossing, but I'm going to show you how we buff that away here in just a minute. Then to even make this more fun, we're going to darken the edges with black Soot Distress Oxide ink. And you might be thinking, oh, that looks terrible. And it does. It really does look terrible. But give me a second, because we are going to add that black ink, and then we're going to go back with Crackling Campfire, and we're going to go over the whole thing again. And it's going to soften that black, but it's also going to draw your eye into the center part of the card, which is again what I was going for with this. So it darkens those edges enough that it gives it a little bit of interest. Now, once I have this done, I'm going to take a dry rag. You can take a dry paper towel. We want to buff away any ink sitting on top of the embossed areas, and look at the embossing pop. There is that beautiful white embossing. This is one of my all-time favorite techniques with any kind of ink, but especially a distress ink. And then we are going to spritz our background with a little bit of water. We're going to blot those little areas dry with a dry rag. It's just going to create some nice oxidation in the background. I also splattered this with some of the gold watercolor to just kind of give it a little bit more of that spooky feel. Anything you can do to add a tiny little bit of interest. Then around the perimeter of this card design is where we are going to have a little bit of fun with repeating die cut shapes. And then we're of course going to have a great little sentiment that's going to feature another brand new Distress Crackling Campfire product. This is the embossing glaze. I'm just simply going to take some clear embossing ink and swipe it on some white cardstock until it's nice and covered, and then I'm going to sprinkle on the Crackling Campfire Distress Embossing Glaze and heat set that. While it is still hot, I'm going to sprinkle on another layer so I get some really good coverage. This is going to create a really awesome glossy type of cardstock that I can then die cut this Boo Simon Says Stamp Sentiment from. You could definitely just do this with the Distress ink, but it's going to be much more muted, like our first card with that thanks and how it looks a little flat. This is very, very glossy and it looks phenomenal. So you could do this before or after you die cut. I find it easier to do before I die cut, and then you can keep that extra little piece there and die cut something else from it. There's still room around the edge. I felt like my Boo needed a little bit of dimension, so I did die cut it 2 more times from white cardstock. In fact, just some of the rest of that cardstock from our panel there. And we're going to stack the letters and exclamation mark one on top of another, and then glue them down to our card base. And again, my best little tool or my best little tip is some acrylic blocks on top to help hold those down. I am using a T ruler to help get my sentiment straight here. But once I have my Boo in place, then comes just putting it all together. And repeating die cut shapes is something that I really, really love as far as a design element. And we're going to be doing a lot of that with these cute little friendly ghosties. In addition to the Boo, I do have a Halloween sentiment strip from Simon Says Stamp. Sentiment strips are pre-printed strips that you simply trim apart and use on your project. They are a huge time saver, and you get 4 sheets per pack, tons and tons of sentiments. They have them in every occasion and holiday that you can think of, and really fun and a great little quick and easy way to add a phrase to a card. For the black layering back behind our Simon Says Stamp Friendly Ghost, so this die, you can see it there on my work table, it die cuts 3 ghosts at once, a small, medium, and a large. I just found some circle dies from my stash or an oval die. I honestly, whatever worked, it did not matter. You could also just trim a little piece of cardstock if you want to. I'm placing it back behind their face so that the eyes and mouth are black on all of these. And then I'm adhering the ghost over the circle and popping those ghosties up with foam adhesive squares around the perimeter of the card. So we're basically framing up our text Distress Oxide inked background. That's kind of a tongue twister. And we're framing it with these cute little ghosts. And as I add more of them, you can really see how cute that's going to be. And then I'm taking some nice long scissors and trimming off the excess and holding on to those little ghosty tails, because they are the perfect little way to add a little bit of extra around the border without having to die cut any extra ghosts. Because they're so tiny and thin, I did glue them directly to the border instead of popping them up. And then I'm going to finish with a little clay heart there underneath my sentiment strip to finish the card design. Finally, we're going to do some easy masking with dies. This gorgeous background from Simon Says Stamp is a hexagon background, plus there's a hexagon greeting stamp set that coordinates with it, and it just works together seamlessly. Plus there's a hexagon die. So I thought, let's go ahead and stamp our background with a clear embossing ink, heat emboss with white embossing powder, and then we can take our hexagon die cut it from masking paper, and place it over each hexagon and do some distress inking. So basically creating our own mask with a die, so much easier than fussy cutting one or anything like that. But we get this beautiful quilted background where each hexagon is a different color. And it's so quick, so easy. You can see I have die cut my hexagon from some masking paper here. And I have my background, and I'm going to place the hexagon mask over a hexagon and ink them up. So our first hexagon is with Crackling Campfire. I'm going to buff away any ink that's sitting on top of the embossing because this is embossed resist. It is some masking. We've got a couple of different techniques going on here. Then we're going to ink up with fossilized amber. We're going to buff away any ink on top of that. We'll just keep moving from one hexagon to another, adding our color. So our 4 colors we're using here, and honestly, I did a much bigger panel than what I ended up using. So while I did use some gathered twigs, you're not going to see that in the finished panel. You will see it with our hexagon sentiment, but as far as around the edges, you're not, because I used a little bit smaller background rectangle die to die cut this panel. And I'll talk about that too and why I chose to do that instead of trimming this down. When I was embossing this background earlier, here just a second ago, I did emboss a smaller background. And what I found was the center hexagon that I wanted to use for my sentiment was off center. It wasn't where I wanted it to be. So I found it easier to start with a bigger background and then I can trim that down. Yes, you can totally trim this down with a paper trimmer if that's what you've got. I opted to use a die. The beauty of using a rectangle die to do that is you can place the die and you can see the background and you can see exactly where it's going to cut, so you don't have to maybe trim a little off this side and trim a little off this side, and you know, some off the top and the bottom. I thought it would just eliminate that hassle of getting it perfectly right, and that's why we're going to use a die to trim down this background. Look how awesome this mask works. I used this single mask, and yes, it's only a one-use mask, but literally I die cut it. I didn't even have to fussy cut it, so that's totally fine. This one mask, I can just pick it up and move it and completely do this entire background. I love this effect. You could do this in any colors of ink that you want to. You could even use dye inks if you want. Let's say you have some favorite colors of Simon Says Stamp or Lawn Fawn or Pink Fresh Studio, whatever case they might be, dye inks. You could do the same technique with dye inks as well. And any color combination. I think a rainbow of hexagons would be beautiful, whatever you want to do there. And the floral designs in these hexagons are so much fun. In fact, I thought they were so much fun that I couldn't leave them just like this. The background is beautiful as is, totally. But I went ahead and I'm going to take the Starry Colors watercolors and we are going to make some metallic designs here. We're going to paint the leaves and the flowers in with these metallics. Adds a beautiful bit of shine. You can see how easy it is to watercolor over the Distress Oxide ink. Because they're both water-based product, it's going to work together great. Probably changes the color of the watercolor a little bit. These are fairly opaque. I would say some of the lighter ones are a little more transparent, but you can see the coverage is really, really good. I'm using a waterproof pen to paint this on. This is one of my favorite techniques as well, as far as coloring in embossed images with these metallics, especially over dark cardstock. That's what I usually do. This time it's over distress inked backgrounds, which I found worked really great as well. And again, any color combination you would use in the background, you could paint over, and I think it would look really amazing. Now you're going to want to make sure your background is completely dry before you die cut it, so that you don't get you don't smash any of the ink or get it on your cutting plates or ruin your background. If time is, of the essence, go ahead and hit it with a heat tool to dry this faster. I let mine air dry. It did air dry very, very quickly. I used only 3 colors from this 6-color palette, kind of that bright gold, I think the red gold, the yellow gold, and then white gold. And white gold is getting kind of thin there because I have used it so much. Look how pretty that is as I'm painting in that white gold over some of the flowers. So beautiful. I really love how that turned out. We're just going to paint in these last little few. Very, very quick and easy watercoloring here. If you wanted, you're going to notice when I die cut this background, I die cut this panel, and I still have a pretty good border all the way around because I started with a big piece here. You could save that and use it for another card. I didn't even think about it. It's still sitting on my desk, but you could totally take that, maybe create some kind of interesting center panel and have this beautiful decorative frame so that none of this actually goes to waste. Now this background, you can actually remove that center hexagon. I didn't when I stamped it because it's not going to matter. It's going to get covered up. But if you wanted this to be seamless, I'm popping up my sentiment, but if you wanted it to be seamless, you could pop this center one out so it doesn't stamp, and then you could stamp the hexagon in that center if you wanted to, or you could make it a window and make it a shaker. There's a lot of different things you can do with this set. As I mentioned, I'm going to pop mine up with foam adhesive, so I didn't bother to remove that from the background before I stamped it. I'm going to stamp this hexagon greeting on a scrap of smooth white cardstock with clear embossing ink and heat emboss with white embossing powder. And then we're going to ink this with gathered twigs. Now, the reason I picked gathered twigs, it's hard to tell in the finished card, but of course the large panel you just saw me paint, I didn't want the color that I chose for this to be touching the same color of a hexagon around it. Gathered twigs was the only one, so that's how we picked gathered twigs. There you can see the gathered twigs is only out on the outer edges, which it's not in the finished panel, but anyway. Here is a basic rectangle, and this is what I was talking about. See how I can see exactly where that's going to die cut? I can center it exactly where it needs to go. Easy peasy. Go ahead and run that through my die cutting machine. And there is my beautiful quilted looking hexagon background. Love, love, love this background. We are going to buff away any ink that might be sitting on top of our sentiment hexagon. And then we're going to place some foam adhesive squares right on our background and pop our greeting in place. I also did die cut or stamp and die cut a phrase from the Say It All Friend stamp set off camera. And I die cut that with a nested banners die that we're going to pop up underneath. We added some little Trinity Stamps coffee bean hearts to this and then placed it on a white top fold card base. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for these 3 easy Distress Oxide backgrounds featuring Simon Says Stamp stamps and dies and Tim Holtz Distress Oxide inks. The supplies I used to create my cards are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here are a couple more videos featuring Simon Says Stamp products that you might be interested in. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell to never miss a new card making video. Thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.